I'm Harriet Sachs, for those of us who haven't met. I am a volunteer moderator for these monthly patient chats that have run for about 7.5 years now. Just a remarkable opportunity for all of us far and wide, and mainly in North America, to get together and understand what it is to live with APBD.
Okay, I met Dr. Clyde Parton at a dinner event in 2021. As I shared with him my work at the APBD Research Foundation, we connected over the rare disease journey. It turned out that Dr. Parton is an expert in rare and undiagnosed diseases. Dr. Parton spent most of his career at Emory University School of Medicine, except for 6 years as a physician in the U.S. Air Force. Those who know him well call him a medical detective with a perspective like Sherlock Holmes. He's the director of special diagnostic services at Emory University and has helped many patients through their diagnostic odyssey. This evening, in recognition of Rare Disease Awareness Month, we've asked Dr. Parton to share his inspiring journey as a doctor detective and the lens through which he helps his patients who are seeking answers and hope. We welcome you, Dr. Parton.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation from Susan and Natasha. I'd like to say that I don't have much experience with APBD. I do have some experience with rare diseases. I'm a general internist. I'm not a geneticist. I think they have the most expertise with rare diseases. You'll notice the railroad tracks on this side. We discovered tonight that these were taken by Robert Zuckerman, who works with the APBD, and he was on site in Pennsylvania filming a movie called Untoppable, and this is on the APBD website. I want to thank Natasha and Susan again for inviting me. One of the things I want to do tonight is define rare and define rare diseases, both in a qualitative and quantitative fashion. These are things you probably have not thought about. Sometimes I take a word like rare and said, if I were the person doing the dictionary, what would I write? And sometimes you found that a difficult thing to do for words you think you know well. People seem to want to know what we do in a rare disease clinic, and well, we see patients and we try to figure things out. It's not much different from anywhere else. It's just more complicated. I want to mention the NIH program and the Undiagnosed Disease Network International, UDNI, which has been beneficial and really helped teaching me about rare diseases. Those are the true experts. I'll talk a little about medical TV shows, rare diseases, and the New England Journal of Medicine in ways you would not think in terms of rare diseases. I'm going to introduce you to Sir Archibald Garrod. Anybody know who he is? Maybe by the time we're done, you will. Then we'll have a little question and answer session, and I have no conflicts of interest to report. So here is how rare appears in the Oxford English Dictionary. There are 2 columns. It's entered as a word 4 times. There are 20 separate definitions, and they give 75 examples. One of those examples would be constituent particles not closely packed together. That's otherwise known as a rare gas, such as neon. Definitions 3B and 5 in the dictionary talk about seldom appearing or seen, of a kind, a class, or description seldom found. That with occurring unusual, uncommon, or exceptional. So that sort of begins to get at the heart of rare disease, maybe. But there was no definition that included disease or pathology. And these examples included things that are rare, such as an albino moose, a genetic defect here, giving 1 petal of this flower, white. Throw in here a rare steak, a totally different use of the word rare, and a rare-headed, 2-headed snake. In the world of rare diseases, terminology is a little different. A writer named Richter scoured the world's literature and discovered there were 296 definitions across 1,100 different organizations. So you can see if you're doing research in rare diseases and you don't have a common definition, it can create problems. They also talk about prevalence thresholds, which just how many people does it take to declare something rare in a population? It varies. The sort of average is 40 to 50 people per 100,000. We'll come back to that number. Why does this matter? Well, if you're an umbrella patient organization such as APD Foundation, you want as many people as you can for financial benefit, to have more social clout. Whereas if you're an insurance company, you want as few people as possible, so you don't have to cover the cost of what may be an expensive illness. So now, a qualitative definition is harder to work with, but it gives people the ability to communicate, I think, a little better in terms of narrative and how people are feeling, a more of emotional sort of way to approach illness, not just numbers. And you can talk about disease severity. Is this disease life-threatening and debilitating? Does it lack good therapeutic options? It's probably hereditary. You can speak in genetic terms. Some controversy exists over using the term orphan or ultra orphan or neglected, and the British don't seem to like this. But this word orphan is well entrenched in the rare disease literature. I don't think it's going anywhere. This is the Undiagnosed Disease International Network. This is a meeting in 2017 in Sweden. People these are the real heroes. These are some of the smartest, most dedicated people I know. Almost all these people are genetic people. Dr. Gall is sort of the founder of this group. His sidekick, Dr. Cynthia Tift, is in here somewhere. I think I'm right there. These are just so dedicated and smart people. So I've learned a lot from them. They're all geneticists. I'm not a geneticist, but I've certainly learned a bit. We go back to the newsletter, the UDNI, from 2018. It talks about a rare disease as being defined if it affects fewer than 5 persons per 10,000 in Europe, or in the USA, we talk about 200,000 people. There are about 7,000 or 8,000 definitions of rare diseases that fulfill this definition. So I don't think even the rare disease expert can keep all of them in their head. Go back off a minute and talk about Archibald Garrard. He is considered the physician father of biochemistry and clinical genetics. In 1908, at the Kuhnian lecture, who was a famous English physician, he introduced the term IEM, or inborn errors of metabolism. And he said they follow the laws of Mendelian inheritance. And he described the first 4 genetic diseases, which is remarkable considering the state technology and chemistry then compared to now. But those 4 diseases were alkaptonuria, albinism, cystinuria, pentasuria. And his father, Sir Alfred Garrard, discovered that people with gout tended to have elevated uric acid in their urine. And this is what distinguished gout from rheumatoid arthritis. As early as 1848, they had figured that out, because then everybody just talked about rheumatism without making much of a distinction. Now, Archie, the son here, he was an unpromising student, and his father was kind of disappointed in him until he discovered that the reason he wasn't doing well in school was he didn't like studying the classics and literature and poetry. He just wanted to study science. And once this was discovered, he, of course, made great progress. He also was the greatest researcher in the butterfly world. Unfortunately, he lost 3 children in World War I. The only child of his that survived was Dorothy, who became a famous archaeologist. And she was the first female to hold a chair at either Oxford or Cambridge in England. It's a very accomplished family. So I think he was sort of the beginning. If you said, what is the history of rare diseases? Basically, I think it sort of starts right here with this man. And you got to jump way ahead to talk about Dr. Marion Finkel. who trained in internal medicine just as I did. Then she went to work for private practice, and then she worked in the pharmaceutical industry. And then in 1963, she was hired by the FDA to oversee their metabolic and endocrine drugs. And her first success was that she figured out a way to get drugs approved to treatment that were generics and didn't have to go through all of the repeat studies just to prove that they were useful. And this was called the paper DNA study, and it was very useful. And it was she who proposed this number of what should define a rare disease, and she chose 100,000 with just this vague notion that it had some sort of financial meaning, that the insurance companies would maybe be willing to, or not insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies would be willing to pursue research on a drug. Turns out the financial incentives were not the best way to go through that route. But she was all of this work was important in getting the Orphan Drug Act of 1883 up and running. But that did not mention the diagnosis of 200,000 people, which is what it eventually came to. So how do we get from 100,000 to 200,000 people as the definition in the USA of a rare disease? And this is what happened in the women's bathroom that I mentioned. Abby Myers was a mom with 3 children with Tourette syndrome. And one of them could not tolerate the standard treatment, which is haloperidol, which caused her son to be a zombie. He did very well on pimazole until the companies quit manufacturing it, citing unprofitability. So she then was managed to clandestinely sneak the drug across the Canadian border, which worked for a while until the person she hired to do that was detained by the customs and confiscated the drug. But she became a real advocate for rare diseases and became a major force and worked well with Dr. Finkel. So this is the famous ladies' room visit. They were at a legislative building in Washington, D.C. at a government and industry liaison meeting. And at the time, as Abby Myers keeps pointing out, men in suits ran pharmaceutical companies. And they were the main people attending this meeting along with the government officials. The only 2 ladies present were Dr. Finkel and Abby Myers. So during the break, they went to the ladies' restroom to get away from the pharmaceutical executives who loved to overhear their talk because they knew they were full of information. And in that restroom break, they stayed about 30 minutes. And it was there that Abby Myers convinced Dr. Finkel to use 200,000 as the cutoff, because that would include more diseases and also maybe give more impetus to the pharmaceutical companies to research their disease in terms of pharmaceutics. So the figure of 200,000 was the duly adopted legal definition of a rare disease, and these are the 1984 amendments to the Orphan Drug Act. So it wasn't the original Orphan Drug Act that mattered, it was the 1984 one that mattered. Senator Waxman was one of the, Representative Waxman was one of the people who really supported this bill. And here they are celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Orphan Drug Act. And they made a show, Quincy did in 1981 on the 10th anniversary of the Orphan Drug Act. What was important about this show was that it's brought awareness to the rare disease communities. And this particular episode called Seldom Heard, Never Silent was about Tourette syndrome. And they did make one more show that involved another rare disease. So our clinic started in September 2013. We kind of got shut down during COVID, but we're back up and running. We just went past 600 patients a few weeks ago. The way we work is we have 3 physicians. Each has 1 afternoon a week to see a patient. So we see 3 patients a week. We have 1 nurse who supports us and 1 administrative personnel. And then we're supported financially by a foundation, the O. Wayne Rollins Foundation, who has funded the money to run this clinic. So we appreciate that. Now, when I was starting this clinic, I asked myself, what should I be thinking about? What are diseases that show up in all of these rare disease sort of things, like House MD, the lady that writes for the New York Times Magazine, Lisa Sanders. I figured I would sort of review those and maybe I'll be more prone to sort of spring-loaded to recognize these diseases that I may not otherwise think about. The first thing I did was go to the New England Journal of Medicine, which every week has a case of the week, which is typically something unusual or hard to diagnose for various reasons. And the New England Journal has been around for much longer than this, but these weekly case conferences didn't start until 1923. So I looked at the first 200 of them. You can see that there was a 97% diagnosis rate in the neoplasm for the most common category. And then I went to 2003 to 2006 and looked at 200 more cases in which there was a 100% diagnosis rate, and noticed that neoplasms were the #1 diagnostic group then. Go down to the third, the circulatory diagnoses were also the same in each group. At the NIH Undiagnosed Disease Program, which was the precursor to the UDNI, they noticed that nervous system and sense organs was their category, was the most common diagnosis. But you can see circulatory also went in there. Incomplete data in our clinic. We haven't tallied the data recently, but nervous system diseases seem to be the most common, followed by mental and behavioral. Now, if you go back to the left-hand part of this chart, I went to House MD and looked at all of their shows, what the shows were about. I also went to the Sunday New York Times Magazine and Lisa Saunders. Now, you notice they have 99% and 100% diagnostic rate, which is we at Emory and the doctors at the NIH, we're just not going to meet that. I'm a little jealous of those numbers, but that's the way it goes, I suppose. But I began to notice something. I began to see repetition. And what I finally figured out was that the House MD people were reading the New England Journal, because I felt like I was reading the same cases. And then I looked into that. And in fact, that is the case. They were reading the New England Journal, getting their ideas. So notice that infectious and parasitic and injury and toxicity. So I think if you're in Hollywood, these are the items that probably would make a show more exciting, because people just love to read about infectious diseases and how you sort those out. And then toxicity always has the allure of is it murder? Is somebody doing something surreptitiously, or where is the toxin coming from? Makes a good TV show. A little bit of historical perspective on the APPD. It goes back to 1980 when Dr. Salvador Damaro, he was known as the enzyme defect hunter. He first recorded APPD. That his face, he looks like such a nice, benign person, very lovely smile. I think everybody would agree with that. You can make out his name on the white coat there. And then 1991, Dr. Alexander Losis described the defect in the glycogen branching enzyme as the real cause. So there was some progress. And then the mutation was identified in 1981. And then Gregory Weiss founded the Research Foundation in 2005. In 2015, you developed a mouse model, and that is what you need to really move forward in research. So I suspect things probably begin to happen then. And a sister foundation was also chartered in Israel for APPD. Prevalence is unknown. About 70 cases have been reported in the world's literature as of 2016. And then in 2016, a case study of 50 people suggested about 70% of the people afflicted with this disease were Ashkenazi Jewish descent. I saw this briefly a few days ago. The prevalence is probably less than 1 per million, so truly a rare disease. And there are about, if I read this correctly, Susan, there's about 3,400 Ashkenazi Jewish people in the U.S. that have gene-proven APVD. Is that correct? You're on mute.
Dr. Parton, no, it's not. This is Harriet. No,
Yeah.
it's not 3,400 who've been diagnosed. That's a genetic calculation, but those individuals have not been identified. In the US, probably well under 200
Oh, really? Okay.
actually identified.
Thank you for that correction. So that's a projected number based on how many people you think have it, but we've only identified about 200 people. So, all right. At this point, I'm happy to take any questions or comments or observations.
Great. I just want to let folks know, feel free to raise your hand, or if you also go off mute, I'll see that and I'll be able to call on you. So we don't all have to speak at once.
Harriet here. I've been getting some email and texted questions, Dr. Parton. So if you'll, maybe we'll bounce back and forth, Calliope, you and I, to cover the questions that come through. So the first one that came to me was, well, the person doesn't really like the word orphan. It has, as you mentioned, a very negative connotation. And so our writer says, is there any chance that orphan idea can be ditched? Here we are meeting every month for 7.5 years. We don't feel like orphans. We're a little lonely, but we're not orphans. And our writer suggested a new word that she had come across, which was nano rare. Is that something that's being recognized in the world these days as a way to refer to those of us who are in this very, very tiny pool of people?
I've heard that term, not necessarily in the setting of rare diseases. I would say that advocacy groups such as yourself are probably the people that can drive this word out of the literature. There are a lot of eponyms of diseases that have come on over the years, and when it became evident that some of these people were involved in experiments in Germany during the war, the journals and the textbooks got together and they began to take those eponyms out of the textbooks, and the journals would no longer use them in articles they were publishing. So you might have to start with getting the Orphan Drug Act renamed.
Oh.
So you'd have to work through your local representatives and get your other advocacy groups on board. I would say that the British lady, she seemed the only person that mentioned that, but now this is the second negative connotation comment I've had tonight. So I guess that's a start.
Okay. Well, I thank you for being so honest. That Orphan Drug Act, yeah, that's a pretty high bar to overcome. Do we have anybody live on screen who would like to ask the next question?
I'm checking here for folks unmuting themselves. Just a reminder, when you look at the panel at the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll see a button where you can click mute or unmute. We also just have a hand that got raised, and I received a request to enable live transcription. So now you can all see the live transcript of the verbal conversation that we're having. My apologies for not enabling that sooner, and transcripts will be on the recording. We have a hand up from Bruce.
Hi, good evening, everybody, or afternoon, depending on where you are in the
Hi,
country.
Bruce.
My wife has APBD, and the question I have is how to interact with the medical community at large of something that is rare. And the example I'll give is something I'm living through right now. I'm calling from the lobby of Cedars-Sinai Saperstein Tower because my wife had a situation I had to have her taken to emergency. And amongst all of her various symptoms, I have to say she has APBD, and then I get a lot of curious looks over what is that, which just tends to create more challenges for the medical community to begin to assess what her problems are, or in fact, see what the interactions and how she's presenting. Is it exacerbated because of her APBD? Is it unrelated to the APBD, et cetera? Any suggestions or recommendations? And I don't know if anybody else deals with this kind of a problem, but these past 3 days have been, to put it as positively challenging as I can.
So Bruce, when the medical personnel or maybe somebody is checking you in and a nurse doing the vital signs, something like that, and you're asked that question, what is your response?
I typically tell them that there's an underlying degenerative neurological situation, and then I try to describe it the best I can, which is informative to some extent. However, I guess in the back of my mind, I'm thinking how she's presenting with whatever her problem was. This particular time, she had a significant cognitive decline. She was having extensive mobility issues. It ended up being an infection. And thank you, Harriet and Linda. Our last caregiver group meeting, we talked about urinary tract infections and how that can present as cognitive decline. But I just present it the best I can. And then to some extent, they have to start going off and researching what it's all about and if the symptoms are associated with it or not, or if they're exacerbated or not, or I don't know how better to describe it.
I guess I could, with experience I've had in the past, offer a few suggestions. I certainly hope you can find a sympathetic primary care doctor who can exude some empathy, because it's not an easy situation. Back in the, I guess, 90s and early 2000s, when I was doing a lot of inpatient work, we were admitting patients in their 20s, late teens, even early 30s that had survived different inborn errors of metabolism, genetic illnesses. And the pediatricians, who most geneticists are pediatricians, found themselves trying to be internists, taking care of people that would not have, in previous eras, not survived. And so as internists, we were asked if we'd be willing to take care of some of these people. And we admitted them to the hospital, and I was doing inpatient work. And I typically notice the mothers, sometimes the father, mostly the mothers. The most powerful instinct in the world is the maternal instinct. The first thing we do is say, I just don't know much about this disease. And maybe you can tell me something, because if I was going to claim that I knew more than this mom, I was in trouble, because the moms always knew this disease. And so that was the first thing to do, is kind of break a barrier. And then I would do what you just mentioned. I would have time, I'd go read about the disease and get the proper specialists in to deal with it. We had, fortunately, geneticists on our staff that were able to come. One thing that we did at Emory, our adult geneticists, that's another point. There are some communities, typically they're going to be academic, where they do have a person on staff, a geneticist, who is particularly adept at dealing with diseases, genetic diseases that show up at the later on in life. Typically, they're mild versions of genetic diseases that show up in childhood. But he went to all of the Emory associated emergency rooms and put a book together that says, when this person comes in with this genetic defect, it's creating this biochemical problem. Sometimes you need to respond very quickly to correct whatever biochemical perturbation is happening. And all you had to do was get this book, go to the website, and you quickly knew what solution you had to start. So that'd be one thing, I suppose. Does that help you any?
Yes, that would help. It sounds like it's a piece of work to put together. Right now, there's the information is in bits and pieces all around.
It's all over the place. I remember a lot of the moms too would just hand me a laminated piece of paper with the main things outlined on it, which I said thank you very much, and usually found it quite useful. Well, it may not apply to every situation, but it certainly was helpful, especially when it was 2 a.m.
Thank you.
Could we supply that for our patients?
Immediately, hey, it's Harriet. Immediately, there are 2 flyers that the APBD Research Foundation has put together. One at sort of, we'll call it the lay level, that all of us here on screen could probably understand pretty easily. And then one that's designed for physicians and health caregivers. And as a minimum, I'm sure I can pop one of those things in the mail, hard copy, as well as electronically to everybody who's on the chat tonight. And that's a start. That is a start. That's a great idea, Susan.
Okay, good.
All right, I'll take care of that. That's on my list. Dr. Parton, I have another question for you.
Okay.
That came in to me. So certainly Dr. Parton has seen many patients through very long diagnostic journeys. Can he identify what patients did that got them to you and got them to their rare disease diagnosis? Were there features of their behavior, their conversation, their preparedness, whatever might be, that got them to the place where they could get an answer?
I think it was just old-fashioned medicine, spending a lot of time with the patient, trying to sort out. We're always struggling with who has chronic fatigue, and there's really, unfortunately, not a lot I can solve, but trying to tease out who among those people has something different. And it may be that there is a minor lab abnormality that we see, okay, it's a pretty trivial abnormality, but it doesn't fit in with the pattern. So that might give you a starting place, or you find some exam finding that's not been previously noted. I always give these patients a very detailed neurological exam because so many of the diseases have neurological manifestations. I listen to family members who describe things, but I don't think there's anything magical.
How about from the patient's side, as they present themselves? Is there anything that you see that they do to help them help you?
Well, one thing is the patients and their families, they're always looking for an answer. Even if the answer is not a good one, they prefer an answer to not knowing. One thing. I think the persistence of the family members trying to solve the problem would be one. And then getting engaged in the process of trying to get a lot of consults lined up, lab work, laboratory tests, x-ray things. It takes a toll on a family to bring people back and forth to the hospital. So just their involvement and support is a key matter.
Thank you. I'm going to give the floor to anybody who's live on screen. Hands up. Well, I'm going to ask the next question then, and that is, how did you get into this specialized area, Dr. Parton? what brought you into this world?
That is a good question. Around 2010 or 11, the medical staff at the Emory Medical School and Clinic saw a need for somebody to do this. And because we were dealing with a lot of complex patients being sent to us as a tertiary referral center, we weren't very organized about what they do, and some of us had more interest in it than others. So it was actually a child of one of the physicians who was on quite a saga of her own child's diagnosis. And she was one of the people that pushed this idea. They eventually found out what was wrong with this child, but the diagnosis was not made at Emory. So that was sort of the beginning, and for some reason they thought I was that person. So I agreed to do it, and that was the beginning. I got involved in the NIH because I had asked one of my colleagues who was also in the clinic. He was particularly good at finding stuff from the internet. And I said, well, can you find what's out there about rare disease clinics? He came back the next morning with this UDN at NIH run by Dr. Bill Gall and Cynthia Tift. And so I modeled my clinic after that. And there were maybe 4 or 5 other places in the country really doing this, including Birmingham, Alabama. I called everybody and said, we should have a meeting. And Dr. Gall said, we've already getting one lined up. It's going to be in Rome, Italy. Why don't you come? So that's how I got introduced to the NIH, and sort of got on my road to learning some genetics and how to go about looking at rare diseases. So that's, I think, pretty much the story. Remind you, I'm not a geneticist. The people that do this, genetic people, they're just so dedicated and such bright people.
Harry, that final question got some folks going, and we have two hands raised. Probably our final questions for Dr. Parton from Ronson and Jennifer. If it's all right, I'll go ahead and call on Ronson. Go ahead and ask your question.
Aloha, Dr. Parton. Thank you so much for participating in this chat
You're
discussion.
welcome.
I mean, I'm struggling a lot more with my memory, but at the beginning of the chat, you mentioned that there were like 200 cases or something. But I think according to what I, my studies over the years, because I was diagnosed in 2009 to have APBD. And so through my studies, like, I think there's fewer than 100 people known to still be alive in the entire world. And I mean, I just wanted to say, with this global pandemic going on, and APBD, this really bites the big one.
Yeah, I'm sorry you're having to go through that. I think Harriet made the point that the last slide that was in error. There are about, I think, 200 people in the U.S. right now diagnosed with it.
Yeah.
200 worldwide, probably
Worldwide.
half of that in the United States.
Okay, half in the United States. It probably, a lot of countries are more sophisticated in genetics than I would have thought. And they can go to Matchmaker and various genetic websites that if you find a patient and you do all the genome sequencing and that sort of thing, and you don't know what it is, but you know it's abnormal, and you put it up to Matchmaker, everybody in the world that's is sending in data to this. So it's a way to, when you have an N equal 1, just one person, but if you have a worldwide input, it may match somebody from Australia or Japan, and all of a sudden you have 2 or 3 people that are matching. So that's I think part of what the NIH people have been successful in doing, is getting matchmaking more people more aware of it. So that's how you, I guess, get more diagnosis. The more diagnosis, the more sense you can make of disease, and
Sure.
said about trying to figure out a treatment. I'm not sure that was your exact question.
Well, that pretty much covers the general, but thank you for letting me ask my question. And I know that big pharma won't get involved in APBD because there's there's few, like Harriet said, there's less than 200 people in the entire world, and fewer than 100 cases in the United States. And so I know that big pharma won't be able to invest in finding like a cure or treatment for APBD, which really bites the big one, but
It is a problem. I noticed, I was reading something yesterday, I think. It's part of that larger group of sort of glycogen storage diseases.
okay.
And I don't know all the politics of how people go about this, but you're sort of descended from that disease in a way. And maybe you put your coattails on a disease that has something slightly similar in the glycogen storage world. Which I think back over the last 10 or 11 years, I've had maybe 2 or 3 people that seem to be running out of energy really quick. It reminded me of a carburetor that was just running on not getting enough gas. And 2 of these people had different types of glycogen storage diseases when I had my genetics team sorted out. Another one did not have a glycogen storage disease. I forget what he had, but we figured it out.
Great. We have one more question from Jennifer, and then I think Dr. Parton, thanks for making it a late night for us. So Jennifer, go ahead.
Hello. Hi, Dr. Parton. I'm Jennifer. I was just diagnosed with APBD back on December 9th, 2021. But it's been 13 months in the making of officially trying to be diagnosed with this. I was originally diagnosed with psychogenic movement disorder in February 2014. I don't know if you know anything about that at all, but and honestly, I have to say, because of my my lethargy, I did fall asleep through some of this, but I do have my husband here who's helped me with some of it, so I apologize. I'm honest with that one. But this is my first group chat.
Thank you for coming.
You're welcome. And I finally had my neurologist write up a letter I had to give to a group. We went to see some people this weekend of what my symptoms were and stuff. And Susan and Harriet, I like the idea of writing something up on a card, or something that I could just say here.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, so basically I just fell asleep. That's all I just say.
Jennifer, I want to thank you. We haven't met before, and I want to thank you for being bold enough to jump right in on a night when all of us are doing something that we're all a little bit uneasy with anyhow. Bravo to you. Welcome to you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for posing that question. You got the last word in for the evening. Bravo for you as well. Dr. Parton, we thank you. You are remarkable to have shared this almost hour with us, not including all of the prep time that you put into making the hour possible. We want to thank you so kindly.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity and particularly enjoy doing it and hearing the questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Rare Disease Month is this month of February, and Rare Disease Day is coming up, and we are honored to have had you come and share your thoughts with us. Just remarkable. I don't want everybody else to leave the screen, but we do want to allow you to go to sleep, because I imagine you're going to have another big day tomorrow. Again, I thank you so much on behalf of everybody whose face you don't see, but we're with you. Thank you.